Love in the underworld is a liability. But when the Costa Syndicate dragged Dominic Russo's plus-sized, fake bride out of a Boston cafe in broad daylight, they didn't just cross a line. They signed their own death warrants. They thought she was just a pawn. They were dead wrong. The contract laid on the heavy mahogany desk of Dominic Russo's penthouse office overlooking the Boston harbor was 50 pages of ironclad legal jargon. Drafted by Richard Hayes, a high-powered attorney at the notoriously ruthless firm of Hayes and Abernathy, the document outlined a simple transaction: 1 year of marriage in exchange for a clean slate. Sitting across from Dominic was Chloe Henderson. She did not look like a Mafia boss's wife. In a world where men like Dominic paraded around with impossibly thin, surgically enhanced supermodels draped over their arms, Chloe was entirely out of place. She was a fat woman, and she knew it. Her face was round, her cheeks flushed with a mixture of terror and humiliation, and her thick curves were hidden beneath a shapeless floral maxi dress that did nothing to conceal the heavy swell of her stomach or her wide hips. She clutched a worn leather handbag to her chest as a makeshift shield. "Sign it, Miss Henderson," Dominic said. His voice was a low, gravelly baritone that commanded the room without ever raising in volume. He adjusted the cuffs of his bespoke Brioni suit, his dark, piercing eyes locked onto her trembling form. "You sign the paper. You move into this penthouse. You attend public functions on my arm for 12 months. In return, your brother's $200,000 gambling debt vanishes. He keeps his kneecaps. You keep your life." Chloe swallowed hard, looking at the dotted line. Her brother, Liam, had always been a screw-up. But stealing from the Russo family's underground casinos was a death sentence. Dominic didn't deal in mercy. He dealt in leverage. And right now, Dominic desperately needed a wife. The old-world bosses of the East Coast Commission, led by the traditionalist Don Moretti, refused to hand over the lucrative New York shipping routes to a bachelor. They demanded stability. They demanded a family man. Dominic didn't have Tom to date, nor did he trust any of the social climbing women in his circle. Chloe was perfect. She was a civilian, a struggling baker who owned a failing pastry shop in the South End. She was manageable. She was desperate. "We sleep in separate rooms," Chloe said, her voice shaking but holding a surprising sliver of defiance. "And you? Your business stays away from me." "My business pays for the roof over your head, Mia cara," Dominic replied coldly, though a flicker of amusement danced in his eyes. "But yes, the guest wing is yours. You will have a black Amex for your bakery and personal expenses. But make no mistake, in public, you are mine. You will smile. You will act like a woman, devoted to her husband. If you embarrass me, the deal is void." With a trembling hand, Chloe signed her name. The wedding was a spectacle of wealth and deception, held at a private estate in Newport, Rhode Island. Chloe wore a custom-made A-line gown that cost more than her bakery maid in 3 years. As she walked down the aisle, she could feel the burning glares and hear the hushed, cruel whispers of the Mafia elite. "Look at the size of her. What is Dominic thinking? She's practically spilling out of that dress. Must be a joke. I give it a month before he hides her away." Dominic heard them too. As Chloe reached the altar, her eyes welling with unshed tears from the sheer humiliation of the whispers, Dominic did something unexpected. He stepped forward, taking her soft, plump hands in his calloused ones. He turned his head, shooting a singular, ice-cold glare at the front row where his capos sat. The whispering died instantly. Absolute terrifying silence fell over the lawn. "You look beautiful," Dominic murmured, low enough that only she could hear. Chloe blinked, stunned. "You don't have to lie. We signed a contract." "I never lie," Dominic said smoothly, pulling her closer for the priest's blessing. And to his own quiet shock, he realized he meant it. He had spent his life surrounded by sharp edges, cold steel, and calculated smiles. Chloe was entirely soft. Real. When he wrapped his arm around her thick waist for their first dance, there was a comforting weight to her, a warmth that slowly began to thaw the frost around his chest over the coming months. They fell into a strange domestic rhythm in the Commonwealth Avenue brownstone. To the world, they were the eccentric new power couple of Boston's elite. Behind closed doors, they were strangers sharing a massive, quiet house. Yet the lines of their fake marriage began to blur in the quiet hours. Dominic found himself coming home early just to sit in the kitchen while Chloe stress-baked. He watched the way she moved, unapologetic in her own space, dusting flour off her ample hips, humming softly to the radio. She refused to use his credit card for anything other than absolute necessities, fiercely guarding her independence. She didn't cower before him. When he tracked mud into the foyer after a business meeting, she scolded him, just like she would anyone else. For the first time in his 34 years, Dominic Russo felt like a man coming home, rather than a boss returning to a fortress. But peace in Dominic's world was always an illusion. And out in the shadows of the city, a storm was brewing. 6 months into the arrangement, the fragile peace shattered. Lorenzo Costa, the head of the rival Costa family operating out of Providence, was bleeding territory. Dominic had systematically choked out Costa's supply lines through the Boston ports, backing the older boss into a corner. Lorenzo was a man of the old school, vicious, prideful, and notoriously devoid of boundaries. He needed leverage against Dominic, something to force the Russo family to back off the docks. Lorenzo had been watching Dominic's new bride. Like the rest of the underworld, Lorenzo assumed the marriage was a complete sham. He looked at photographs of Chloe, a heavy-set civilian baker with no ties to the life, and laughed. He figured Dominic was simply using her to appease the commission. Lorenzo assumed Dominic didn't actually care about the fat girl, but taking her would be an insult to Russo's pride. A man's property, after all, was his property. Taking her would force a sit-down. It was a brisk Tuesday morning. Chloe had insisted on maintaining a shred of her old life, which included her weekly walk to Bova's Bakery in the North End to pick up specialty ingredients she couldn't get from her wholesale suppliers. Dominic had assigned 2 guards to her, Paulie and Vincenzo, but Chloe often slipped out the back of her shop to avoid them, hating the feeling of being babysat. She walked down the cobblestone streets of Salem Street, her breath pluming in the crisp autumn air. She was wearing a thick wool coat over a heavy sweater, her mind preoccupied with a new recipe for ricotta pie. She didn't notice the black Lincoln Navigator idling near the corner of Prince Street. As she crossed an alleyway, a heavy hand clamped over her mouth. Chloe screamed, but the sound was muffled against a leather glove. Rough hands grabbed her arms. She fought fiercely, her heavy frame making it difficult for the 2 men to easily lift her. She threw an elbow, catching one of the attackers in the jaw. "Grab her legs, you idiot! She's heavier than she looks!" hissed Frankie, the rat Lanza, Lorenzo's chief enforcer. "Get off me!" Chloe shrieked as the glove slipped for a fraction of a second, but a heavy blow to the side of her head sent a shockwave of dizzying pain through her skull. Her vision blurred. Before she could recover, she was shoved violently into the back of the SUV, her knees scraping against the floorboards. The doors slammed shut, the tires screeching against the asphalt, as the vehicle tore out of the north end, leaving only Chloe's crushed grocery bag and a half-spilled box of powdered sugar on the cobblestones. 30 minutes later, Dominic Russo was sitting in a smoke-filled back room at his legitimate front, a high-end steakhouse in the Seaport district. He was reviewing ledger books with his underboss, Matteo, when his private cell phone rang. It was a burner number. Dominic raised a hand, silencing Matteo. He pressed the phone to his ear. "Speak." "Dominic, boy, you're a hard man to reach." Lorenzo Costa's raspy voice echoed through the speaker. Dominic's blood ran ice-cold. Every muscle in his body coiled with lethal tension. "Lorenzo, to what do I owe the displeasure?" "I'm looking at something of yours." Lorenzo chuckled, a nasty, wet sound. "Or, well, a lot of something. Your wife." "Jesus, Dom, you couldn't afford a gym membership for her with all that money you're stealing from my ports." The world stopped spinning. The air in the room seemed to vanish. Dominic stood up so fast his heavy oak chair crashed backward onto the hardwood floor. Matteo jumped to his feet, his hand instinctively flying to the holster under his jacket, recognizing the terrifying shift in his boss's demeanor. "Where is she?" Dominic's voice wasn't a yell. It was a deadly, hollow whisper. "Relax. The fat cow is breathing. For now," Lorenzo sneered. "Here is the deal, Russo. You sign over the deed to the Providence shipyards, and you pull your men out of the South Side. You do that, and I'll send your fake little wife back to you. Might even send her back in a freight truck, given her size." Lorenzo laughed at his own joke. It was the last mistake he would ever make. In that fraction of a second, the carefully constructed facade of Dominic Russo, the calculating businessman, the cold strategist, completely shattered. The men in Dominic's crew had always whispered about his temper, but few had ever seen the true, unhinged monster that lurked beneath his tailored suits. Hearing another man demean Chloe, hearing the absolute terror he knew must be coursing through her right now, it broke something deep inside him. The marriage might have started on paper, but the wrath awakening in his chest was a terrifying, all-consuming reality. "Lorenzo," Dominic said, his voice vibrating with a demonic calm. "Listen to me very carefully. You are a dead man. Your capos are dead men. Your soldiers, your associates, the men who drove the car, dead. Big talk for a man whose wife has a gun to her head," Lorenzo spat, losing his bravado. "You have 24 hours to hand over the docs, or I put a bullet in her brain." The line went dead. Dominic stared at the phone. He slowly closed his fist, the expensive smartphone cracking and splintering under the immense pressure of his grip, shards of glass cutting into his palm. He didn't feel it. Blood dripped onto the Persian rug. He looked up at Matteo. His eyes, usually an unreadable dark brown, were pitch black. "Call everyone," Dominic ordered, his voice echoing off the walls like the tolling of a funeral bell. "Empty the armories. Call the cleaners. Call the hitters in New York." Matteo swallowed hard, terrified. "Boss? All of them? That's a war. The commission? Fuck the commission!" Dominic roared, overturning the massive heavy oak table with one violent heave. Papers and ledgers flew into the air. "Costa took my wife. He put his hands on my wife." He stalked toward the door, pulling his custom 1911 pistol from his shoulder holster, checking the chamber with a sharp mechanical clack. "Matteo," Dominic said, pausing at the door, the shadows of the room clinging to him like a shroud. "I want Costa's men found, and when you find them, I don't want them dead. I want them wishing they were. We are going to burn this city to the fucking ground until she is back in my arms. Dominic's wrath wasn't a sudden explosion. It was a methodical, terrifying plague that swept through the underbelly of Boston. Within an hour of Lorenzo Costa's phone call, the Russo syndicate transformed from a structured business empire into an absolute war machine. The usually bustling streets of the North End grew eerily quiet as Dominic's enforcers flooded the pavement. They weren't looking for negotiations. They were looking for blood. Dominic personally led the hunt. He stripped away the veneer of the civilized businessman, trading his bespoke suit jacket for a tactical Kevlar vest and a heavy trench coat. His face was a mask of cold, unyielding stone, but his dark eyes burned with an infernal fury. He started at the docks, storming a warehouse managed by a known Costa associate named Jimmy O'Brien. Dominic didn't bother with a subtle approach. He drove a reinforced armored SUV straight through the loading bay doors, crushing crates of smuggled contraband before stepping out into the dust and chaos, his custom pistol drawn. "Where is the navigator?" Dominic roared over the screams of terrified dock workers. Jimmy O'Brien, trembling and bleeding from a shattered collarbone, tried to crawl away. Dominic pinned the man's ankle with his heavy combat boot, pressing down until a sickening crack echoed in the cavernous space. Jimmy wailed in agony. "Lorenzo has my wife. You have 10 seconds to tell me which hole that rat crawled into, or I will feed you to the harbor piece by piece." Jimmy gasped, choking on his own blood, and confessed. He gave up an abandoned meat-packing plant on the outskirts of Providence, nestled near the dark waters of the Seekonk River. Dominic didn't even grant the man the mercy of a quick death. He left Jimmy bleeding for the police and ordered his men to burn the warehouse to its foundations. Meanwhile, miles away in Rhode Island, Chloe Henderson was living a nightmare. She was shoved violently into a freezing, rust-scented room inside the derelict meatpacking plant. Her wrists were bound tight with heavy zip ties, chafing her soft skin raw. She was forced into a hulled metal folding chair in the center of the room. A single harsh bulb swung overhead, casting long, menacing shadows against the blood-stained tiles. Lorenzo Costa paced around her like a feral dog. He was a gaunt, ugly man, with a face scarred by decades of street violence. He sneered at her, blowing thick cigar smoke directly into her face. "I have to admit, sweetheart, I'm deeply confused," Lorenzo rasped, leaning in close. "Russo is a billionaire. He could have any supermodel in Europe, but he picks you, a thick, clumsy baker who can barely fit in a standard chair. It's laughable. He's using you, piggy. You're just a pawn for his commission standing." Chloe coughed, her eyes watering from the acrid smoke. Her head throbbed violently from the blow she had taken during the abduction, but a stubborn fire ignited in her chest. She had spent her entire life being bullied for her weight. She had endured cruel whispers, judgmental stares, and the constant feeling of being less than enough. But Dominic hadn't treated her that way. Dominic had looked at her with respect. He had defended her. He had made her feel safe. "He might be using me," Chloe said, her voice shaking but laced with a surprising venom. She lifted her chin, refusing to break eye contact with the mobster. "But you clearly don't know Dominic Russo if you think he lets people touch what belongs to him. I am his wife. Fake or real, it doesn't matter. You crossed a line. He isn't going to negotiate with you, Lorenzo. He is going to kill you." Lorenzo's face twisted in rage. He backhanded her across the cheek, a sharp cracking sound that echoed through the empty plant. Chloe gasped, tasting copper as blood pooled in her mouth. Her cheek stung fiercely, But she didn't cry. She stared back at him, defiance radiating from her heavy, beautiful frame. "Hit me again," she whispered fiercely. "Every bruise you leave on me is another bone he is going to break in your body." Before Lorenzo could raise his hand again, a deafening explosion rocked the foundation of the building. The heavy steel door at the far end of the corridor blew entirely off its hinges, flying through the air and crashing into the concrete wall with the force of a freight train. Alarms blared to life. Gunfire erupted, a chaotic, deafening symphony of automatic weapons tearing through the night. Lorenzo froze, the color completely draining from his scarred face. Frankie the Rat burst into the room, his clothes covered in concrete dust and blood. "Boss, it's Russo. He brought the whole fucking army. They're slaughtering everyone." The assault was a masterclass in brutal efficiency. Dominic Russo didn't just breach the meatpacking plant. He decimated it. His highly trained strike team moved with lethal precision, systematically eliminating every Costa soldier who dared to raise a weapon. The air grew thick with the smell of gunpowder and copper. Dominic was a phantom of death, moving through the dimly lit corridors with terrifying speed. He didn't flinch as bullets sparked against the concrete around him. His only thought, his only driving force, was the woman locked somewhere in this decaying labyrinth. He kicked open door after door, leaving a trail of bodies in his wake. Matteo, his underboss, covered his flank, marveling at the unstoppable force his leader had become. They finally reached the heavy industrial freezer doors at the back of the facility. The reinforced steel was locked from the inside. Dominic didn't hesitate. He signaled his demolitions expert, who slapped a breach charge onto the heavy locking mechanism. "Fire in the hole!" The blast blew the locks cleanly away. Dominic kicked the heavy doors inward, stepping into the freezing room through a cloud of thick, swirling smoke. Inside, Lorenzo was frantically holding a pistol to Chloe's head, using her substantial body as a human shield. Chloe was shivering violently, her floral dress torn, her cheek bruised and swelling, blood dripping from her split lip. When Dominic saw her injured face, a low, guttural snarl ripped from his throat, a sound so purely animalistic it made Matteo take a step back. "Drop the gun, Lorenzo," Dominic said. His voice was no longer a shout. It was a cold, whispering promise of unimaginable agony. "Drop it now, and I promise you will die quickly." "Back off!" Lorenzo screamed, his hand trembling so violently the barrel of the gun rattled against Chloe's temple. "I'll blow her brains out, Russo. I swear to God. Let me walk out of here. And you can keep the fat bitch." Dominic's eyes flicked to Chloe. Despite her terror, despite the cold and the pain, she looked back at him with absolute trust. She wasn't crying. She gave him a microscopic, almost imperceptible nod. Dominic slowly lowered his weapon, feigning surrender. "Okay," he said softly, raising his empty left hand. "Okay. You want the docks? You want safe passage? It's yours. Just let her go." Lorenzo laughed, a nervous, triumphant sound. "I knew it. You're soft, Russo. You broke the Commission's rules for a piece of trash. Now kick your gun away." As Lorenzo leaned slightly to the right to watch the gun slide across the floor, his grip on Chloe loosened by a fraction of an inch. That was all the opening Dominic needed. With lightning speed, Dominic drew a secondary, suppressed, sleek tactical knife from his heavy coat sleeve and threw it. The blade spun through the air, catching the dim overhead light before burying itself deep into Lorenzo's right shoulder. Lorenzo shrieked, dropping the gun. Before he could even register the pain, Dominic crossed the room in 3 massive strides. He grabbed Lorenzo by the throat, lifting the older man completely off the ground. Dominic's immense physical strength was terrifying. He slammed Lorenzo into the brick wall with bone-shattering force. "She!" Dominic growled, driving his fist into Lorenzo's ribs, producing a sickening crunch. "Is my wife." He struck him again, harder. "She is the Queen of Boston." A third strike, breaking Lorenzo's jaw. "And you are nothing but dead weight." Dominic tossed the broken, unconscious boss to Matteo. "Keep him alive. I have plans for him later." Dominic turned immediately to Chloe. The terrifying aura of violence vanished in an instant, replaced by a desperate, frantic gentleness. He fell to his knees in front of her chair, his large, blood-stained hands trembling as he pulled a knife to cut the thick zip ties binding her wrists. "Chloe," he breathed, his voice cracking with an emotion he hadn't felt in decades. "Are you hurt? Where did he touch you?" Chloe rubbed her raw wrists, tears finally spilling over her lashes as the adrenaline left her system. She collapsed forward, her heavy frame falling directly into his chest. Dominic caught her, wrapping his massive arms around her thick waist, pulling her flush against him. He buried his face in her hair, inhaling the scent of vanilla and sugar that still clung to her, despite the horrific ordeal. "I'm okay," she sobbed into his tactical vest. "I knew you would come. I told him you would come." Dominic pulled back just enough to look at her bruised face. He gently traced the line of her uninjured cheek with his thumb, his dark eyes shining with unspoken devotion. "I would burn the entire world down to find you," he whispered fiercely. "I am so sorry I let this happen. I swear on my life, no one will ever lay a hand on you again." He stood up, effortlessly lifting her into his arms. Chloe gasped, wrapping her arms around his thick neck. She was deeply insecure about her weight, acutely aware of how heavy she was, but Dominic held her as if she weighed absolutely nothing. He carried her out of the blood-stained warehouse, past the shocked faces of his men, and out into the cool, dark Rhode Island night. The aftermath of the Providence massacre changed the landscape of the East Coast underworld forever. Lorenzo Costa disappeared, never to be seen again. The Costa family dissolved in a matter of days, their territories swiftly swallowed by the Russo syndicate. The Commission, terrified by the unhinged brutality Dominic displayed, never questioned his marriage again. They learned a valuable, bloody lesson. Dominic Russo's wife was completely untouchable. 3 weeks later, the physical bruises on Chloe's face had faded. She was back in the safety of the Commonwealth Avenue brownstone, standing in the massive kitchen, wearing one of Dominic's oversized dress shirts. She was attempting to bake a batch of cinnamon rolls, the scent filling the quiet home. Dominic walked into the kitchen, dressed in sweatpants and a simple t-shirt, completely stripped of his Mafia armor. He walked up behind her, wrapping his arms securely around her soft, wide stomach, pulling her back against his solid chest. He rested his chin on her shoulder, pressing a soft kiss to her neck. "You're working too hard," he murmured. Chloe smiled, leaning into his warmth. "I have to keep my hands busy. Besides, the contract says I get an unlimited budget for baking supplies." Dominic turned her around, his dark eyes completely sincere. "The contract is gone, Chloe. I burned it yesterday." Chloe's breath hitched. She looked up at him, her heart pounding against her ribs. "You burned it? But the deal—" "There is no deal," Dominic said softly, bringing a hand up to cup her face. "I don't want a fake wife. I don't want a business arrangement. I want you. All of you. Exactly as you are. Tears pricked Chloe's eyes. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel the need to hide her curves or shrink herself down to fit into someone else's expectations. Dominic Russo, the most dangerous man in Boston, looked at her like she was the most precious treasure on earth. "Are you sure?" she whispered. "I'm not exactly mob wife material." Dominic smiled, a rare, genuine expression that lit up his entire face. He leaned down, capturing her lips in a deep, passionate kiss that sealed their true vows. "You are exactly what I need," he said against her mouth. "You're perfect." And as he held her in the safety of his empire, Chloe finally knew that the terrifying Mafia boss hadn't just saved her life. She had saved his soul. Did this thrilling Mafia romance capture your heart? If you loved watching a ruthless boss tear down the criminal underworld for the woman he loves, hit that like button and share this story with your friends. Please do not forget to subscribe to our channel for more intense, pulse-pounding drama and unforgettable love stories. We bring you the best twists, fierce heroines, and unstoppable heroes every single week. Drop a comment below with your favorite moment today. See you soon.